concerned about people only bringing up racism against Huda as like a gotcha. I'm concerned because I fear that it's not doing what anybody thinks that it's doing. To say like no one stood up for or spoke out about the racism that Huda faced, but everyone is so focused on the racism that other cast members faced. You don't always have to put a but in things like that. You can have a very real conversation about having a man who is openly Zionist interview a Palestinian woman on national television, about having a cast member who is openly Zionist in the house potentially able to couple up with a woman who is Palestinian. These are all things that are concerning. People made very weird comments about her, I'm sure. I personally did not encounter it. It was not served up to me, I guess, because the algorithm doesn't think that that's something that I would be interested in, and good. For some reason, though, the algorithm thinks that I would be interested in anti-Black racism against Shelley and Olandria. The amount of times on this page that I have mentioned being a Nick Olandria stan, the amount of times that I've said how much I love Shelley and Olandria, the amount of times that I've talked about racism against, and still I was seeing that. That was being served up to me on a shiny platter. It's a hard needle to thread living in a world that is dominated by a rise of reactionary conservatism, where it feels like we're literally groups of oppressed people doing the Hunger Games against each other while white supremacy laughs in a box and watches and like throws us bones. I do think two things though. The first thing is that people are operating in this zero-sum logic where, as a means of being revolutionary and leftist and supporting causes of groups that are oppressed by the United States, they've decided that their target is going to be 2 Black American women. And they're going to use targeting those women and criticizing them as the litmus test for how down they are and how supportive they are of Palestine, basically. And on the other side, and this we've seen this since the election last year with Kamala Harris, we have a lot of Black American people who have chosen to be violently anti-Palestinian, violently anti-Arab as a response against what they see as those factions tanking the election for Kamala Harris, even though This Is America, was a Black woman ever going to be president, especially when she was running up against Mr. White Supremacy. I think the issue with that latter group is very obvious. It's so obvious to me that it feels almost asinine to even have conversations about it, because it's like, well, yeah, of course you don't respond to not getting what you wanted from your like imperial center election by being violently racist towards a group of people who's currently being exterminated out of existence. So I feel silly even like saying that out loud. I think the thing that to me is more insidious, harder to parse, and that I see people who I think are really trying to behave in good faith but don't realize that they are being like tricked, is the Shelley and Olandria of it all. They think that by validating this narrative that Huda not necessarily created but like supported and continually insinuates towards being the truth, they are not only supporting her but also being anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, anti-American hegemony, and being pro-Palestinian. And that's a lot of work to ask an interpersonal conflict that is happening on a reality TV show that is airing in the imperial center of the world to do. That's a lot of weight to put on your interpretation of that interpersonal conflict. And maybe this is my interpretation of the situation just because it's legitimately difficult for me to understand people who watch that entire season of television and still, including the reunion, and still come out on the other side saying Huda was like 98% right and Shelley and Olandria were like 98% wrong. And for the people who aren't like actively and unrepentantly anti-Black, I guess that's who this message is for. It's just, I think you were missing the mark trying to do this whole like whataboutism in terms of racism that Huda faced versus racism that Shelley and Olandria faced. And I think people do this all the time with anti-Black racism. We saw rumblings of it with this whole Sierra situation where everyone was like, well, Yulisa got kicked out immediately for saying slurs against Black people, but Sierra says slurs against Asian people and she's not getting kicked out immediately. I understand the temptation, but that's not like, that argument doesn't help anybody. You can just say it's wrong that people were being racist to Huda. You can just say NBC Universal Peacock put her in a dangerous situation multiple times as a Palestinian woman being surrounded basically by Zionists. You can just say it was wrong for Sierra to use the slurs that she used. No matter what you mean to illuminate by building the comparison, the end result is anti-Black. It is creating a comparison that is meant to minimize anti-Black racism or act as though people are so sensitive about and hyper-reactive to anti-Black racism, but they're not to all these other kinds of racism. And so people should be more reactive to that and less reactive to anti-Black racism. That's the implication that I get, at least. And it's been really exhausting over the past entire summer, basically, to watch a lot of people who I have largely admired on this app and on social media everywhere red pill so aggressively. I'm not trying to say that Shelley and Olandria were angels, because nobody is an angel who is on reality TV. Like, let's be 100% honest. But it's hard for me, someone who sees the archetype of person that Huda is so clearly, because I am a Black woman who grew up around Black women, who grew up in community with Black people, who saw people like her enter our spaces and take up space in the exact same way that she showed up on that show my entire life, and not have any critiques for how she behaved and how she showed up on that show. And I don't know if it's a situation where people just aren't familiar, or if it's a situation where people really just don't care because she's doing it to Black people. But I find it troubling. And the same way I can empathize for her catching feelings for a guy really quickly and then doing things that were not necessarily like acceptable on television, I can also empathize for Shelley and Olandria not behaving perfectly at all times. They didn't organize a brigade of mean girls against her. They just sometimes were a little bit weird towards her, because I think they also recognized exactly the type of person that she is. Non-Black women of color who enter into Black spaces date Black men almost exclusively and treat Black women as though they are ladies in waiting to their love story. And then if the Black women refuse to play the role of being the lady in waiting to their love story, malign them and treat them as though they are aggressive, mean, rude, unkind, any number of negative words. That's a tale as old as time. I don't understand why people are acting like that's not the exact archetype that she fits. Her love for those girls was contingent on them serving the narrative that she had created in her head. And as soon as one of them didn't do that, they were discarded, like, as a group. Because Olandria asked Huda to speak up for her and Shelley. Huda didn't want to speak up for Shelley, and she wasn't going to do it just for Olandria. So she chose to stay silent instead. I think racism that she faces as a Palestinian woman is important to talk about. And the way she behaved was weird. In this hyperpolarized world, we're being served a certain way to virtue signal our support for progressive causes. But the thing is, in this world that is built on anti-Blackness, if you are not pro-Black, and consciously so, then you are anti-Black. And I would recommend a lot of people interrogate that. Because what is American hegemony built on if not anti-Blackness?